Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 15.4 top lane tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes to this patch. Most notably, tank items got pretty heavily nerfed across the board. They tagged Unending Despair, Heartsteel, Fimbulwinter, and Abyssal Mask. Those are some of the key ones. They aren't all overpowered. In fact, in the likes of Heartsteel's case, they even specified that they don't think the item is in a overpowered state at the moment, but it's just perceived to be very strong. Steel Caps also got nerfed this patch, which is really big for some of the AD top laners. They buffed up Marks, which makes them feel a bit better to build. 1300 for Marks felt really bad. I'm glad they made that change. And then some direct buffs and a direct nerf towards Warwick. The buffs were Sion, Gangplank, Yasuo, and a very small change to Jace. Basically not notable, but still something there. Let's get into it. So the DT is going to consist of two champions at the moment, and that is Smolder and Udyr. They are the least popular top laners on this list. They are both bad in the top lane. In Udyr's case, he's basically been nerfed out of the top lane. They nerfed his ult and his ult like empowered form, on top of like some other like direct nerfs towards his like E movement speed at one point, I believe, and then some other changes there. He also got directly hit by Unending nerfs this patch and Fimbulwinter nerfs this patch. This champion's basically non-viable in the top lane. I would recommend only playing him in the jungle in his current state. In Smolder's case, I don't think this champion's horrible into Cassante almost specifically in like tank matchups. He's bad into practically everything else. He will get pretty heavily like demolished in laning phase. He is pretty weak there against a lot of matchups. Like Aurelia, for example, will just run him over consistently. If you want to play Smolder anywhere, play him in the bot lane. You can make him function in both the solo lanes, though, into very specific matchups. Cassante is like the one which I would only really recommend trying him into, as that is like one of the more common ones you'll run into. Maokai could arguably be dropped all the way down to the D tier. This champion's terrible now. They nerf. Maokai had already suffered quite heavily with a direct change to Unending Despair. He was quite heavily hampered by that. The nerf directly to the item this patch, like as a follow-up, the flat damage going down makes it really bad as a rush option. Maokai is one of the champions which usually rushes it. Some of the other champions usually go as like a second item option, but Maokai with the nerf to Unending and the nerf to Fimbulwinter is struggling a huge amount this patch. I'll have him as a low C option as he's still a utility flex CC option, but I would recommend avoiding him. He's probably the worst tank you can opt into now out of the champions I present in the top lane. In the case of Jace, he's just very hard to pilot. I don't have him like Maokai is bad and easy to play. Jace is hard to play and decent if you can pilot him well. Like if you can pilot him really well, he's one of the best top laners in the game still. He outputs a huge amount of damage, still has decent base values. You're more leaning towards those like AD and Bruiser variants. Like Hubris has definitely picked up a bit more in mid lane, not so much in top lane. Top lane you're still usually going like the Eclipse variants. Overall though, this champion is not a pick I really recommend for like the mid elo range, which I kind of aim for. But if you can pilot it well, then yeah, he's still a decent pick, and he does translate really well into high elo. He's a pick which I would recommend most people learn at some point if they are looking to like go higher, like go further with the game in general. Rumble and Cassante are similar champions, just in a different boat in a way. Cassante is a tank which can still have value within the game in solo queue, but he just doesn't have as much agency as some of the other options. He doesn't scale that well, and that can often hinder the champion for solo queue primarily. In Rumble's case, he's very much built around his laning phase. It makes him a very oppressive elite pick. In like competitive as well, he still performs decently. Like there are specific like counters to him, like Regalio for example, but that doesn't really see huge amounts of play for like average MMRs, especially in the top lane. But yeah, these picks, if you can pilot them well, they can still get you results. They're just picks which I'm not going to really recommend for like the average player at the moment. Silas is a conditional counter pick. He works nicely into like your Nars and your Malphites and like good ultimate varieties, like which like he can which he values a decent amount. But outside of that, you're not really playing him in the top lane. You'll mostly play him as a mid lane or even a support option. Like Silas support isn't that bad at the moment. Like you can make him work there. But yeah, these three champions, for their difficulty primarily, still have value in elite, primarily off their early game. Silas, more conditional of a counter pick. I've removed Victor. He's just fallen out of play within the top lane. He really surged because of his like visual update, and now that the play rate's gone back down, yeah, he's kind of gone back to being unpopular as an option here. So I think he's fine though. Like, you can make him work as a top lane option. Gwen is an elite skewed pick. She kind of falls into the same boat as like your Yones, your Fioras, for example. A champion which I wouldn't really recommend outside of like tank matchups. If you can pilot like these picks well, they are very good. Like, they can output a huge amount of damage, have a huge amount of agency, can do a lot of damage on the side lanes. Can also have really good like flank angles. Gwen is an incredibly strong free item spiker. Like, if you can get to 3 items on Gwen, she is up there as one of the strongest champions in the game. In Yone's case, once he gets access to Bork, he can oftentimes find himself able to 1v1 most top laners in the game, making it very hard to side lane against him, as he has a lot of mobility, a lot of chase potential, and obviously isn't restricted by mana costs, which some or most top laners traditionally are. Swain is going to remain as a C-tier option. This champion, great into like tank matchups. I really do value him as a good pick when it's like Cassante Scar on the top side, maybe. On Sion, like, there are other options there. I wouldn't recommend blinding him ever in the top lane. He really struggles into high mobility top laners, and he has very low resistances, so he is very easy to like chain just kill, and like if you fall behind, you'll suffer quite a bit playing Swain in the top lane. Pantheon, I still have as a C-tier option. I still think Pantheon is a very volatile pick. Honestly, he could probably be bumped up to the B-tier. I don't think he's a locked C-tier option by any means. Like, this champion just is very predicated on early game advantages, and that makes him a bit of a liability, especially if you are not able to consistently get them. I'd say he's a decent counter pick. Like, if you're willing to whip him out as a counter pick every so often, like into like maybe like an Ambessa, for example, then you can definitely get value from the champion. Would I recommend picking him all the time? Probably not. Like, he's not a great consistent climb option. I don't think he's the hardest champion to play, but you do need to be very aggressive early on to the game. This is not going to be the pick for everyone. Sion and Gangplank both got buff this patch. I have Sion could probably be bumped up to the B tier. Actually, I'll bump Sion and Gangplank up to the B tier. Gangplank really benefited from his armor growth change. I don't think Gangplank's terrible. I think he's not in the best spot he's ever been in, but if you can pilot the pick well, he's still outputs a lot of damage, and he can be really good in specific scenarios. He's very hard to play. Like, that is always going to be the prohibiting factor of this champion, and that probably still leaves him as a high C-tier pick, if anything. In Sion's case, the main thing with this champion, he gained 4 armor and 1.5 health regen, which is really nice as like a base like value. Helps him into some of his harder AD matchups, just makes him a bit more resistant, a bit harder to kill early on to the game. Common misconception of Sion is he's a scaling pick. He really spikes quite heavily on one item. Like, if you can get access to like a Sunfire or a Titanic or just another like really good spike option, then he can do a good amount of damage. Like, his Q has really good base value. Like, if you have AD, it also has a very aggressive AD scaling on it, and this champion can really do a decent amount in the mid to, I mean, even like early to mid game. Like, once you have like 1-2 items, he can really like benefit from that point. Later on to the game, obviously he's an infinite health scaler. He can just act as a body, but you'll struggle to consistently land Qs, and that can oftentimes just devalue the champion quite heavily. But you are just like gonna be a shield printer. The item nerf to Heartsteel and Unending do hurt him quite a bit. That is some power down. It also hurts his scaling just in general. He sits as more like a low beta option, but like if you play him, I think he's fine. Nasus sits in the beta. They buffed him last patch. It was decent. It makes him like viable again, especially in mid to low MMRs. Do I think he's viable in higher elos? Not really. He needs a bit more, but if you can freely scale to like a mid, like level 9 to 13 kind of area, you are really, really oppressive in that kind of region. Having access to like all points in Q, and then like your level 11 giving you more power in your ultimate, can be a really strong champion at those kind of spikes. He, kind of akin to Sam, isn't like an I mean, is an infinite scaler, but isn't actually as oppressive as like a scaling option as like other picks are. But like if you give these champions like their stacks, then they will still be relevant later on into the game, obviously. Quinn sits in the beta at the moment. The buff she received to her W recently has just solidified her as a decent option in the top lane. The buff towards symbiotic souls as well, but for +5 movement speed, she is going to be one of the top laners which benefits from it the most. I'd recommend trying Quinn. Like, you don't need to pick up the champion at the moment. I don't think she's mandatory, and I think she sits as more like a high beta option now. But if you enjoy her, then she could definitely be a good way of getting LP at the moment. Vayne, decent into like some of your tank matchups. I think this champion does have a huge amount of damage, is oftentimes very threatening on side lanes, does get punished very heavily by like ganks. Like if you find yourself falling behind on this champion, you will definitely just be chain dying. You are squishy, you're a marksman, you don't often opt into durability until later on into the game, and yeah, she can definitely be punished, but I still think she definitely has value if you're very comfortable in playing the champion in the top lane. Fiora benefited from the true damage change more recently. I mean, I would recommend trying like your PTAs and your Shojins on this champion now. Shojin obviously is a bit of a question mark of an item at the moment. I know a lot of people really dislike it as it has a really horrid build path. Like having access to no haste until the full completion of the item when like you are building it usually for its haste feels very bad. And yeah, definitely some champions get punished by that. Fiora though, definitely recommend trying it. Like you still want your Ravenuses. I still believe you want your Trinities in most situations. But she, definitely doing a bit better at the moment. Still kind of sits around the like Yone Gwen area where you need to pilot the pick really well to get a lot of value. Ambessa sits within the B tier. She is number 2 for pro play at the moment after Cassante in the top lane. She is an incredibly good elite pick. She definitely sits towards the high end of the B tier. Doesn't perform as well for the average player. Obviously, she's an incredibly hard to pilot champion. She has like a Kalista-like mechanic built into her passive that on like a skirmisher bruiser, kind of akin to Riven. She's gonna obviously have quite a skill curve. If you can pilot her well, she is a very good champion to have within your arsenal at the moment. If you can't, that's unfortunate. Just yeah, she is very good, like especially translating into high elo and competitive. But if you're focusing on like mid elo and just getting to master, you don't need to be playing Ambessa at the moment. Jack sits within the B tier, great into champions which are heavily countered by his E. I wouldn't recommend blinding him at the moment, but if you can find the matchups where you feel comfortable playing him, your Camille's, there was another one which has just dropped from my mind. I can't remember. But yeah, Camille, for example, Jax is very good in that spot. There are other ones, like the auto-based matchups, which, yeah, like Counter-Strike counters. And yeah, he can be quite valuable in those spots. Trundle, great for low elo, terrible for high elo. This champion is very one-dimensional. It predicates on poor macro. If enemy doesn't respect you on side lanes and you're just allowed to 3D split into like an AD or a tank, AD booster or a tank, then he can have a lot of value. If you're playing him into like champions and like players which like understand macro and they're like matching you or like pushing out waves on the sides, it will be really hard to have value on this champion, and he definitely falls down quite a bit. But I still think he's a fine option, especially if you're looking to get to like Emerald, Plat, or Plat, Emerald, even to Diamond. Honestly, like Trundle can be a good champion for that kind of route. Alawi, another champion which is pretty heavily like low elo skewed at this point. Oftentimes is predicated on landing your E and then just stat checking and hoping that you can just be on the side lanes for most of the game. That is where she can really thrive as a champion. If people just play range and like kite you out and play champions which have the mobility to just play into you, it can be really hard to pilot this champion, and like yeah, better players will definitely punish you a lot more. Varus is pretty good at the moment. I really think Varus is kind of slept on as an option. If you're looking for a marksman in the top lane, Varus is probably one of the better picks accessible to you at the moment. The thing with Varus is the Ginsu's Hullbreaker build is very, very oppressive. It gives you a great mix of damage. You're very oppressive early on into the game, you're very oppressive in the mid game, and you're just like a marksman later on into the game. You can output a huge amount of damage. Obviously the biggest concern is your lack of mobility and the fact that you will find yourselves with sometimes not having a great engage option later on, but Varus top can in certain drafts be one of the better options accessible to you. Yeah, Ginsu Hullbreaker, Wits End or Terminus or Jack Show. Like, you have different things accessible, but as long as you're sticking to the 2-item core, this champion is a very effective marksman option on the top lane at the moment. Rise, decent AP. I actually have him towards the lower end of the B tier. I think he's great if you're looking for an AP option in the top lane. I'd still recommend like your Auroras and your Gragas's and your Teemos, especially in like lower elos, like your Teemos for example, over him. But I think if you're looking for someone who has a bit of flexibility to the mid lane, has great wave clear, has great like lockdown with the point and click CC, I think Rise can be a good option there for you. Tryndamere, this champion is not what Tryndamere players want to play at the moment, but I think he is. Well, I think he's pretty impressive in what he does in his current state. The just Palmer split, like Demolish, Grasp, Sustain, Ravenous Hydra, like Doran Shield, just like not being able to move him out of lane and just having so much pressure on side lanes. It's just the way you play him. Like if someone can match you, or you can't flip trades early on into the game, or you just fail to flip your trades early on into the game, then he will really suffer as a champion. I don't think he's at all healthy in his current state, but his gameplay pattern is what it is at the moment. Like that's how you have to play him. You just split on the side and sustain off the wave and just like go in and just repeat and just cycle like that trading pattern down. Like Vladimir and Aurora, some of your AP options. Aurora obviously benefited from the electrocute buffs more recently. Vladimir has been just generalistically on the rise. Like I think Vladimir is a high B tier option in his current state. Aurora, bit harder to play. Definitely fallen out of popularity in the top lane. Still a decent mid lane option. Like if you're comfortable playing Aurora, I would recommend still playing her in the top lane, especially if you're getting the results. If you're not getting the results, you don't need to rely on Aurora in her current state. She's not a mandatory AP option, and yeah, she is progressively like dropping in popularity. In Vladimir's case though, he is definitely doing a lot better at the moment. Also a mid top flex option, and yeah, I'd say he is a good AP pick if you are looking for someone with good scaling, good overall team fight damage, and a good level of hypercarry capability. Malphite is only here on the basis that he is very easy to play. I don't like Malphite in his current state. I think he is a champion which can oftentimes only find himself available in draft as like a B4, B5, R5 option, and that like you oftentimes when you're picking that late into the draft, you want a champion with a bit more agency, whereas Malphite is a very low agency champion, oftentimes just wants to get through laning phase and be slightly oppressive in laning phase if you're playing like a Q harass build. He doesn't scale awfully well. Like this champion is just a point and ult kind of like you see carry, ult for carry kind of champion. I just don't think he's that reliable as it. Well, I get in some aspects he is a reliable option, but he just doesn't give you the tools. Like you are relying on someone else to carry the game for you, and I think in some circumstances that can be good. And I think Malphite can work if you're playing him into like a Jax and enemy team just doesn't have the tools to deal with you. I think there's still value to this champion. He's obviously one of the easiest top laners to play in the game, so you can value him higher on that. I don't like the champion that much at the moment. I think he could probably do with being buffed, but what can you do? Yeah, Malphite is a B2 option. Mundo, definitely weak with the Heartstone nerfs and the Unending nerfs. Probably sits towards the lower end of the B tier now. I also don't like Mundo in his current state. I think in general he's just been a slightly over nerfed, especially mid to high elo. He's still a good low elo option. Like you can still get your results all the way up until like Plat Emerald, and he will still be one of the better top laners there. Higher than that though, like you're really going to struggle a lot more. He just doesn't scale as well. I mean, he still scales well. Like Mundo is still one of the better scaling tanks, but he doesn't scale as quickly. Like you are going to be slower to get to that point, as he is just weaker up until that point now because of some of the direct nerfs towards him, and hard still being nerfed. Gragas is within my B tier. He is a great AP option in the top lane. I once again think everyone should have Gragas as an option within their arsenal. He has tank builds, he has bruiser builds, he has full AP burst builds. He has a lot of like ways you can go him. He is a great neutralizer in the lane. It can oftentimes be quite hard to move with Gragas. He can do a lot of damage. He scales relatively well. He's a great disruptor and has great like synergy with specific champions like Yasuo, for example. And yeah, I'd say he's a great champion to have in your arsenal. He's just quite hard to play, and that can prohibit him from being high up in this tier list. Not mandatory at the moment, but yeah, still a decent option. Tom Kench definitely drops lower down now. I think Tom, Mundo, Malphite are like options you can go to, especially if you're like lower down, like you're in the gold to like iron range or like plat to iron range. I still think these champions can be like really good options there. I think the higher up you go though, they're just so much weaker as picks compared to some of the other options. They just don't have as much agency and then are predicated on like your enemy champion or enemy player just not understanding how to play against them correctly and giving them like free gold. In like Tom Kench's case, that is how he will like oftentimes kill someone, where he'll like kidnap them under tower and then just be able to burst them down in that time frame. But he is weaker. He has been directly nerfed like 3 times now, so sits towards the low end of the B tier. Akali and Renekton wrap up the B tier. I think Akali's a good AP assassin option, probably the best AP assassin option in the top lane at the moment, unless you consider Kennen an AP assassin option, which I mean kind of is. But like yeah, both these champions, and Kennen's a great AP harass, like ranged harass option. Akali's a great AP just dive assassin. Like you could, there are specific matchups where Akali can really like be valuable as a pick, like Gwen, Olaf for example. Akali's great into these matchups, and I think if you're looking for a mid lane AP assassin which you can flex to both roles, she's a great option in the top lane as well. Decent option in the top lane, I should say. Renekton sits as a beta. He's a jack of all trades. He is someone that probably everyone has played at some point. If you play top lane, he is a great early to mid game like bruiser. He falls off quite aggressively later on to the game, but he's still good at what he does. Like, he's not in the best spot he's ever been in. I think you still need to pilot him really well to get a lot, like, the value and the wins out of him. But if you are very comfortable on him, yeah, I'd still say you can get the results, and I would still promote him as an option. Wukong leads off the A tier. Do I actually leave Wukong in the A tier? I'll leave Wukong in the A tier. I think he's a pretty hidden OP pick at the moment. Well, not hidden OP. He is a hidden decent pick in the top lane. He's good into some of the AD matchups. The nerfs he received in 15.3 though did hurt him, and it doesn't make him as promotable. I think he is, yeah, not a high A tier option, but like a mid to low A tier pick. Like, you can get the results if you play him in the right spots, be quite a valuable option in draft. People will expect him to go into the jungle, so you do have that aspect going for you as well. 2 champions I was going to drop down are going to be Poppy, and actually I'll only drop Poppy down. I'll talk about the other one in a second. Poppy is weaker with Unending and Fimbulwinter being nerfed. She traditionally built these items quite a bit. Cindered Sky also is going to be weaker on. When you are playing like that overall like heal shield print build, it is just going to outright be a direct nerf to that build. If you're going like Cindered Sky and you're not going with the other options, you are still going to obviously have that same level of power. Like, your early game power isn't going to be any different. Like, that Cindered Sky spike is still very valuable on her. But once you finish the Fimbulwinter, you're going to notice the shield decrease. And like Unending Despair, you're going to notice that you're healing less. You're going to be in the fight for less duration. And you're going to be printing less shields and HP. It means quite a bit. She drops from the A tier down to the B tier. Still good into like specific matchups which are very heavily countered by her W. Cassante, for example. Kennen sits an AP option within the top lane. I have Kennen and Karma as... Actually, I'll just talk about them individually. Kennen is really good as a AP to elite translation option. Like, if you want a pick which is going to do well across like mid into high elo, Kennen is a great option. I really like Kennen as a pick. He does a lot of damage. His ultimate is a very powerful tool. Most people don't really play against him that well, and he just has a it teaches you pretty good aspects of the game, and like, he is obviously a good AP ranged top lane bully, which is good in high elo. So I would recommend learning him at some point, but not mandatory, as are like a lot of the A and B tier options. In Karma's case, she's a great enchanter option in the top lane. The Malignance into Horizon Focus or Cosmic Drive, or you can pick up both into like an enchant build, is decent at the moment. And the addition of Axiom Arcanist really did benefit her. Definitely solidifies her as an A tier option at the moment. Ornn and Shen are like weaker options now. Shen directly hit by Unending Despair being nerfed, Heartsteel being nerfed, Ornn being nerfed by Unending being tagged, and Fimbulwinter being tagged. Like, these champions have just lost direct power, and that does mean quite a bit. I think Ornn itemization is pretty hard at the moment. Like, you are I mean, okay, so Deadman's on is hidden strong. Like, I want people to really give this item a try on him. Like, into some of the AD matchups, it is a really good rush option. Do I think tier is mandatory now? Probably not, but it is really nice to have certain spots. Like, if you are going, like, if you are basically guaranteed to be going Frozen Heart and you're running Mana Flow Band, then Fimbulwinter is still an item you're traditionally going to want to pick up within the game, but he is still just powered down, so he does sit towards the lower end of the A tier. Shen also powered down, Heart still, and yeah, Unending being enough. So both these champions definitely sit towards the lower end of the A tier. They're easier options to play, and they obviously have good team utility, and they scale relatively well. I mean, On scales relatively well. Shen doesn't scale as well, but still has value later on into the game with his W and his ultimate as good, like, peeling tools for your carries. Zac sits within the A tier. He's really unpopular in the top lane again. He's not as, like, oppressive anymore. Like, he's not like an S or like even a high A tier option, but he can still be quite like a powerful pick here, especially if you are like a jungle to top Zac flex player. Heimerdinger, very unique champion. Most people don't understand how to play against him, and I have him paired alongside the likes of Kled and Singed, which are not your very unpopular options, but still can output very good results if you do main these champions. Kled mains do really well because he is so unpopular, and people don't understand how to play against him. Kind of akin to Singed, most people just don't understand how to play against the playstyle. Camille, doing decent at the moment. Obviously, very hard to play. Pilot, this champion does require a lot of games to really understand her functionality within the game, but if you just nail the splitting and the like isolated 1v1 or the 2v1s with like getting jungle to gank, she is a very powerful pick on side lanes. Relia, Riven also doing decently. Like, these champions all are very high skill options, and unless you put a lot of time into them, I recommend avoiding them. Like, these are like, I mean, most of these picks here are like very OTP driven, like champions like RW6. You do just need to have a lot of time on them to really make them work as options, especially if you are playing them generalistically. Like, if you are playing them into specific matchups, then it is not as mandatory, but like Riven, for example, you have to execute her combos well, otherwise she really isn't as powerful as a champion. No, I really like as a pick. I don't think he's quite a mid to high A tier option, but if you can play him well, he is a great pick at the moment. He obviously has great kiting tools in Mini, great stat check and CC capability in Mega. If you get access to Trinity, he is really, really powerful on that spike. He can be quite vulnerable before that, like being a bit squishier as an option, but definitely doing a bit better as a pick at the moment, especially for more of an elite slash pro play skewed champion. Volibear, very volatile champion. He is, I'd say, a bit weaker than Warwick at the moment. Like, if you are looking for something, and maybe Warwick is banned, and you play both the champions, then Volibear is a great option. This pick, yeah, really benefits from just being able to stat check most champions and then just dive them, having absurd amounts access to absurd amounts of healing. The E is a very powerful ability with being a shield and a huge amount of damage. I think this pick is just decent in his current state and definitely a champion which, if you are very much a fan of like that early aggression playstyle, like your Sets, your Warwicks, then yeah, you're going to want to play Volibear at the moment. Yorick, very, very low elo skewed champion. Like, he really benefits from being played in lower MMR and mid MMR brackets. This champion obviously is a very, very predicates on very bad macro. Like, if enemy team macro has bad macro, then you will just split and win the game a lot of times. He is very stat checky. He can beat most top laners when he has access to Maiden. I think this champion, very good in low to mid MMRs, but people just don't understand how to play against him that well. Set, actually, I'll talk about Set in a second. Teemo sits within the A tier, high A tier option. The nerf to him in 15.13 did mean something, and it did make him a bit weaker, but the buff towards his jungle monster mod does help him, even in top lane. Like, it allows him to help with Barra and help with Attica, and still poach away camps a bit easier, and that is quite valuable. So yeah, Teemo sits as a higher A tier option now. Olaf is very good into high CC champions and champions which rely on their CC to kind of function as picks. Into like Urgot, for example, Olaf just runs a matchup once he gets access to his ultimate. Obviously, before that, you can oftentimes find yourself just being solo killed if you're just not respectful of Urgot flip. But the champion, yeah, better than he has been in a while. Just doing a bit better with like some of the other champions being nerfed around him. Still struggles with Stridebreaker obviously being a bit weaker, but definitely a pick which I'd recommend trying. The E also does benefit from the true damage amp change more recently. Do I think you're going to opt into like PTA or Shojin? Probably not, but that is just something to be like aware of. Even like Olaf Jungle obviously benefits from the Jungle Monster mod amp. So Darius, Aatrox, and Garen are my other champions within the A tier. These are like obviously 3 very popular champions at the moment, and they are all very powerful in their own regard. Garen scales incredibly well. It's very high mobility. His W is an incredibly obnoxious ability. Basically ignoring CC is very powerful, and he can output a huge amount of damage. In Darius's case, he is doing a bit better, kind of akin to Olaf, still very, very much wants to get advantages early and is a bit elite skewed. I mean, a lot of early game champions just are elite skewed, they close out games early, which obviously makes sense in that regard. Aatrox has had discussion around his builds. There are loads of options you can go on him at the moment. We've seen bruiser builds, we've seen tank builds, we've seen assassin builds. It really comes down to what you need within the game. Things like Cycler Swords, Shojin, very powerful items. Cycler Sword's really powerful. Shojin is debatable at the moment. Like, people have been discussing whether it's actually mandatory, but Cycler Sword looks really good on him. Even the likes of Iceborne and Deadman's, though, like, if you're going more a tanky route, can be good on him. Standard is to, like, your Eclipses and your Cinder Skies, for example, though. Like, it's just worth trying out a lot of builds on him. Yasuo, I forgot to talk about. He remains in the C tier for top lane, but he's definitely doing a lot better now. The change really did benefit him, the removal of the crit modifier. He now scales a bit better. Like, that was one of Yasuo's biggest weaknesses. He was a very good early game bulk spiking champion, but then fell off the later on into the game you go. The removal of the crit reduction, or crit modifier on him does mean he scales better, and the cheaper IE means you can opt into a second and output a huge amount of damage. So Yasuo definitely to be someone aware of into like the Gnar matchup, for example, and some of the other ranged options within the top lane. So my S tier, there are 7 champions here. Let's go from right to left. So Cassiopeia is very unpopular in the top lane, but she is incredibly oppressive. She is my recommended AP ranged option at the moment. And actually, Cassiopeia and Kayle kind of are both ranged options. In Cassiopeia's case, yeah, she outputs a huge amount of damage, basically nullifies most bruisers and skirmishers and tanks from ever really being able to access her. Like the self-peeling and the movement speed of this champion is incredibly oppressive. In Kayle's case, she scales incredibly well. She is really, really powerful, especially in mid to low MMR, where games will go out before duration. Petals being added to the game plus direct buffs really benefited her, and she is definitely one of the better performing top laners at the moment. In Cho'Gath's case, he is doing really well with 2 builds at the moment. I say doing really well with 2 builds. The Shrelia Halo Blaze build just isn't actually as performant at the moment, but is like obviously perceived as being very strong. There are different routes you can go though. Like, you can run Arcane Comet on him. I do recommend trying out just a bunch of keystones, like playing what you feel really comfortable on. Grasp, obviously, pretty like mainstream when you're playing like the Emax with tank. You can even go Qmax with the Halo Blades build, and the Symbiotic Souls buff this patch really did help him if you are going down that route, picking up an early Symbiotic into Shrelia Deadmans, into like your AD matchups, does give this champion a lot of power. Definitely, just in general though, doing quite well at the moment. Very stat checky and has great sustain, great scaling. Yeah, good champ. The other picks here are, Set and Mordekaiser. Your classic mid-elo top lane juggernauts. In Mordekaiser's case, both of their case they are stat checky. Mordekaiser spikes more on like your level 9 to 30. Mordekaiser spikes on like 6 to 13. That is like where he really shines as a champion. Access to Death Realm, and then just being able to stat check almost every champion in the game makes him incredibly oppressive in that regard. In Set's case, he is very oppressive throughout the early game. Most champions can't match his damage. He will stat check most options. It really benefits from high health ball targets which you can throw into the enemy team. Doesn't scale as well compared to some of like your Kales and Cho'Gaths, but if you can get an early game advantage, he is very solid, especially in mid elo and low elo. He still like performs relatively decently. My 2 picks at the moment though, which I recommend, and honestly, Argot's probably just the outright strongest. Like you could probably put Argot in S plus, with the steel caps nerf, but once again benefiting him, so making it harder to itemize against him. Yeah, both. I mean, actually, I'll just leave Argot there. In Warwick's case, he got nerfed this patch. It was a 10 mana cost on Q. It was a slap on the wrist. He's still very good, really strong into specific matchups, which like can't really deal with his healing and his stat checkiness. He's bad into most ranged options, and Argot, for example, like if you are playing Warwick, then I would recommend banning Argot. But yeah, both these champions definitely performing really well at the moment. They are my number 1-2 options, but the S tier is still very good. Like all these champions have really good spots within the game, and I definitely recommend trying them out. And yeah, if you're looking for like an easier tank option to play, which is still viable at the moment, then Cho'Gath, yeah, great within that aspect. But like if you want a bit more agency, then like yeah, Argot's your Warwicks, your sets, your mods, and Kale, if you can get to late game, are all very good options. Those are my thoughts for the 15.4 top lane tier list. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.